Hello dear students. Today our lecture is on domestication of animals. After going through this lecture, you will be able to understand the definition, meaning and significance of domestication, evaluate the differences between the wild and domesticated species of animals remains, examine and understand various factors responsible for domestication, understand various processes of domestication, map various early locations where the initial domestication took place, and understand consequences of domestication. Hunting wild animals and harvesting wild vegetables in the wild have been the two main sustenance practices from the beginning of modern humans. Homo sapiens, some 2 lakh years ago, however, the first attempts to domesticate plants and animals were made around 12,000 years ago during the end of the most recent ice age and during the transition to the present interglacial era. This occurrence took place in a maximum of 9 regions around the globe, including the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes and Amazonia, the eastern United States, the Sahel, tropical West Africa, Ethiopia, and New Guinea. As farmers moved to other areas of the world, only a few of the domesticated species that originated in these few homelands of agriculture were gradually dispersed over the rest of the world. This is due to the fact that farmers had control over the production of food, which gave them significant demographic, technical, political and military advantages over their adjacent hunter-gatherer communities, allowing them to impose their way of life on those populations. The history of the last several millennia consists of narratives of hunter-gatherer civilizations being driven away, infected, defeated or destroyed by farming societies in all regions around the planet suited for farming. These accounts can be found in every part of the world. The Neolithic transition was characterized by profound social and spiritual shifts, one of which was the domestication of plants and animals. This development occurred concurrently with a significant shift in the manner of life of an expanding number of human communities. Additionally, this made it possible for a substantial expansion in the human population. Animal domestication, according to Peter J. Uko and G. W. Dimbleby, is the process of genetically selecting particular kinds of animals, emphasizing the unique characteristics that will continue to be useful to the domesticator. They go on to explain that undomesticated chicken don't lay excess eggs, wild sheep don't have extra wool, and wild cows only provide the amount of milk needed for their young. The definition makes it obvious that people opted to domesticate those mutant animals since doing so gave them additional advantages. By separating natural populations for selective breeding under human supervision, Brian M. Fagan expands on the same idea by proposing that modifications in wool bearing, lactation, or surplus egg production may be achieved. Domestic sheep with thick coats and domestic goats that generated a steady supply of milk, which were a staple food for many human populations, were created by isolating mutant animals from a broader gene pool. In a similar vein, Sandor Baconi contends that during the process of domesticating animals, members of species with specific psychological traits are captured and tamed, removed from their natural habitat and breeding community, and kept and bred for the benefit of humans while also receiving food and protection. Similar to the cultivation of cereals, animal domestication was a gradual process with numerous stages that happened concurrently with plant domestication. Southwest Asia served as the nuclear zone for both agricultural and animal husbandry. While certain animal species in Europe underwent independent domestication, other domesticated animals did originate in Southwest Asia. Now we will discuss difference between wild and domesticated. It is important to analyze quickly how one can distinguish between domesticated and wild animals based on the available evidence. It is important to note in this context that the archaeological evidence for early animal domestication is restricted to bones discovered from farming villages. Archaeozoologists have sought to distinguish between wild and domesticated animals by using the bone crystal analysis technique. Up until the 1990s, it was believed that a marked difference in size between the species was a key indicator of whether an animal was wild or farmed. Studies by Melinda A. Zeder and others, however, have cast doubt on this idea in recent times. Zeder has claimed that size should not be used as a criterion to distinguish between wild and domesticated species, since it depends mostly frequently on the sex of the species in question as well as environmental factors. Zeder goes on to explain that the skeletal evidence suggests a distinct and continuous difference between bigger men and smaller females rather than domestic status. Moreover, the animal sizes were probably impacted by environmental factors including rising temperatures and aridity. Therefore, size of the animal is no longer seen as a key defining characteristic for the transition between the wild and domesticated. The age of the animal when it was killed can be used as a distinguishing factor between wild and domesticated species. It is generally accepted that a hunting community prefers to kill adult animals because they produce the best meat in both quality and quantity, while herd owners kill young and surplus male sheep, goats, and cattle for meat and rear females until they are no longer able to bear children and give milk. This method of identification was specifically used on the sheep bones discovered in Zawi Chemi Shanidar in the Zagros Mountains. However, several adult wild animal bones have been discovered from various European and West Asian sites where widespread domestication was practiced. The justification given for this divergence is that young people were abducted rather than slain in order to be domesticated, whereas adults were slaughtered for their flesh. Wherever a whole animal skull has been discovered, determining the species of the animal may be done by examining the dentition, number, type and arrangement of teeth. This is based on the observation that domestication changes the way that animal dentition develops. Now we will see the causes of domestication. There have been many justifications given for why humans domesticated animals. Economic need has obviously been highlighted as the primary driver of domestication. After the end of the Pleistocene epoch, there was a significant decline in wild animals which led to a crisis in human livelihoods. As a result, the primary goal of domestication was to free people from their dependence on the natural supply of games, which had made hunting for prey unpredictable owing to the loss of many animal species. In other words, by domesticating animals, people were building up ready-to-use food stores that they could draw upon whenever they felt the need. This is supported by the fact that most domesticated wild species in the Near East, including sheep, goats, boars and cattle, were heavily hunted for their flesh before being domesticated. Many academics have attempted to link sedentism to domestication, despite the fact that few contend that human sedentism was a necessary precondition for animal domestication. Others, such as Sendar Bokinial, point out that domestication did occur among nomads in harsh climatic conditions, such as the domestication of reindeer by the northern nomads, although he does concede that true animal husbandry did not develop. Further, he contends that while there is no clear connection between sedentism and domestication, maintaining, taming and breeding a large number of animals was not conceivable without some primitive sort of corrals which would have required at least a brief settled existence. In a similar vein, Bocconi contends it would be difficult to feed a sizable established population without domesticating animals. The probable use of animals in ceremonial sacrifices is a third argument for the origins of domestication. Evidence suggests that dogs were interred with people in graves during the Upper Paleolithic era by the Magdalenians in Central Europe. There is further evidence from the Anatolian site of Catalhoyuk, which dates from between 7000 and 6000 BCE, indicating the sacrifice of domestic livestock. Evidence of domestic dogs being used as sacrifice animals has been discovered in the Danube region's Lepensky Vir and dates to roughly 5000 BCE. These results do imply that human domestication of animals may have included some form of sacrifice. Now, we will see domestication and its processes. Most academics agree that animal husbandry was a protracted and difficult process requiring several generations of both the domesticators and the domesticated. Animal domestication was the product of several human generations' experience and learning about the anatomy, biology, physiology and psychology of various wild animal species while hunting, not just because of human necessity. Although it is challenging to identify the precise time when domestication started, several reasonable explanations may be offered as to how the process of animal husbandry got started based on the information that is now available. The domestication of certain animal species was preceded by extensive hunting of such animals. The Magdalenians of southwest France engaged in extensive reindeer hunting in the Upper Paleolithic, and the Natufians of West Asia focused on gazelles near the end of the Paleolithic. Similar to this, human societies hunted wild sheep and goats extensively in the northern Caspian Sea region close to Iran. This makes it abundantly evident that people hunted gregarious creatures, which was advantageous for domestication since gregarious animals tend to follow the dominant leader or travel in groups, making them simple to tame. Additionally, animals that belong to a herd can join any domestic herd and begin reproducing there. In this perspective, Kent Flannery contends that confined gregarious animals can be in some ways viewed as a reserve of food, safeguarded, stored, and kept against difficult times. But as we are well aware, not every gregarious animal can be domesticated. For this reason, understanding an animal's psychological makeup was crucial in the process of domestication. The animals that were less aggressive or submissive were preferred. As a result, it appears that the process of domestication started with specialized hunting in which one or more animal herds were targeted and tracked by humans while they were on the move. As time went on, people began defending the chosen herds from wild animals and other hunters who viewed them as their property. Later, humans began controlled herd hunting by first eliminating unnecessary males. The next step was to limit the herd's range of motion, although no effort had been made to relocate them from their natural environment at that point. Later on, people probably began to capture, tame, and domesticate young wild animals. Thus, catching and taming the animal with individualized care was a crucial first step before domestication. Actual domestication of animals entails removing species from their native breeding communities and keeping them in new domestic herds that may occasionally be larger in size than the wild herd. The social and sexual nature of wild animals changed as a result of breeding under human influence. Now, we will see forms of animal domestication. Animals were domesticated by humans for their own benefit. Hence, domestication techniques have to go beyond simply providing people with their immediate nutritional needs. In other words, in order to continue enjoying the benefits of domestication, humans had to engage in deliberate breeding. In light of this, Sander Baconi divides animal domestication into two phases: animal keeping and animal husbandry. According to him, keeping animals was a simple and early form of animal husbandry in which deliberate breeding was absent, and animal food was consequently both qualitatively and quantitatively inadequate. The care of animals featured a few different breeds. Domesticated animals were smaller and more simplistic than their wild counterparts. Nevertheless, castration of bulls, bucks, and boars was introduced mostly at a young stage, removing natural selection, allowing for a certain type of primitive breeding selection, according to Baconi. He further elaborates, noting that young females were not slaughtered, whereas two-thirds of men were. After being used once for lambing, females were slaughtered at the sub-adult stage, and one-fourth of the males were also killed at this time. Thus, at this early stage of domestication, the valuable breeding community was constituted by less than 10% of males and roughly 20% of females. However, there was no deliberate breeding to increase productivity in terms of producing more milk, meat, speed, or wool, either coarser or finer. Contrarily, animal breeding relied on deliberate breeding selection and good nutrition that was both qualitatively and quantitatively adequate. Speaking of characteristics of animal breeding, Sander Baconi claims that in a population of domesticated herds, different breeds coexist. In some species, like the horse and the hen, the size of the domesticated animals increased, surpassing even their wild forms, and the productivity of domestic animals also increased. Numerous genetic modifications were brought about in domesticated animals as a result of animal breeding. This featured a significant rise in breed diversity among many domestic animals, a vast increase in species variety relative to their wild forms, and a speedy acceleration of their evolutionary processes. Now, we will see evidences of domestication of animals in Europe and Southwest Asia. Animal domestication did not start in a single location, and it also started as soon as people achieved a particular degree of cultural and economic development. But the exact genesis of animal husbandry is still a matter of debate. At this point, domestication of locally accessible wild animal species started in a number of locations. Historically, it was thought that animal domestication began in the Neolithic period, but recent findings has led many to contend that the first evidence of animal domestication dates back to the Mesolithic and perhaps the late Paleolithic. Dogs and pigs, for instance, were first domesticated around 18,000 BCE. Although it is true that this attempt at domestication did not go beyond taming and retaining these animals, this prevented the development of genuine animal husbandry. The main reason was that large-scale domestication of animals was difficult since the nutritional requirements of dogs and pigs were comparable to those of people and could be satisfied by human leftovers. However, since livestock such as sheep, goats, and cattle could readily thrive on agricultural waste, experiments in effectively domesticating these animals began as soon as farming took off. Goats, sheep, and cattle were initially domesticated in Southwest Asia, where farming first took hold. Pigs and dogs were domesticated earlier. Southwest Asia might be seen of as an excellent nuclear zone for domesticating due to a number of factors. According to Andrew Smith, the first domesticated animals originated in dry regions where it was simpler to manage the movement of herds of animals. According to Brian Fagan, when the environment dried up after 7000 BCE, similar climatic conditions also occurred across most of Southwest Asia. In addition, due to the favorable climatic circumstances, all 5 of the main domesticated animals, that is, dogs, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle, could be found in their wild forms in great abundance here. Sheep and goats were regarded as the ideal animals for domestication trials because they could survive on fodder like straw and hay, which was rich in cellulose and was primarily an agriculture byproduct. They were small animals and posed no threat to humans. They tended to stick with their flock and they had easy to follow eating habits. Additionally, wild varieties of domesticated cereals like emmer and incorn wheat and barley were widely available in Southwest Asia. Cultivation of these plants began around the same time as animal domestication, and by the 9th millennium BCE, all 5 of the earliest domesticated species had arrived in this area. Southwest Asia is credited with providing the ideal environmental circumstances for animal domestication, where cattle need meadows, pigs required an abundance of water, and caprowines, that is, sheep and goats, did well in desert environments. The domestication of animals in this region, however, was not consistent and was only practiced in the fertile valleys along the main rivers or in the Piedmonts of enormous mountains. The attempts at animal husbandry were less effective in high alpine regions where the climate was hostile. Therefore, people had to rely more on hunting for their survival. Scholars are deeply divided on whether or not animal husbandry was introduced to Europe from the Near East by colonizing herders, or whether or not animal domestication developed independently in Europe and the Near East. The domestication of sheep and goats in Europe, however, has been ruled out by fresh archaeological evidence and genetic research using ancient and current DNA, and the so-called wild sheep and goats seen on Mediterranean islands are now thought to be descended from the Near Eastern caprowines group. The genetic information that is now available also favors bringing cattle from the Near East to Europe. Recent pig genetic findings, on the other hand, provide a contrasting picture and indicates that wild boars were domesticated naturally in Europe. In Europe, the climate south of the Balkans, especially in Greece in the mid-9th millennium BCE, was comparable to the Near East. Therefore, sheep and goats made up 80% of the domestic fauna, followed by pigs, cattle, and dogs. Greece was a hot, arid region that was ideal for raising sheep and goats. As a result, there was no need for humans to hunt or fish for additional proteins because there was enough animal-based food available. Sheep and goat-based animal husbandry subsequently spread from Greece to the northeast, then to Central and Eastern Europe in the second part of the 9th millennium BCE. It was impossible for caprovinus-based animal industry to flourish in the temperate zone such as Southern Europe because the climate did not favor optimal breeding site for sheep and goats. Instead, human tribes in this region centered their economy on animal species adapted to the temperate climate. Now, we will see the consequences of the domestication of animals. Animal domestication was not started as a hobby. Rather, it resulted from human economic needs. Although there were many effects, there was no effect on animal husbandry on humans. Animals benefited from this process as well, since without the genetic changes that humans caused throughout the process of domestication, many species would not have survived the regularly shifting climatic circumstances. So, in a sense, there was a symbiotic link between animal species and humans. While humans first benefited from animal goods like meat, milk, and wool, they subsequently began employing oxen and horses for transportation as well as for plowing, which led to a qualitative change in their social and economic circumstances. There were also some drawbacks to domesticating animals, such as the introduction of new illnesses into humans due to human interaction with animals. Animal husbandry had a greater effect on the animals since the animals underwent significant genetic alterations. Charles Darwin, one of the pioneers in studying the changes, noted that certain species breed quality improved and the variety of animals rose significantly when compared to their wild forms. Animal captivity hastened evolution and resulted in the emergence of mutant species. Several species that were domesticated saw certain widespread and concurrent alterations that have to do with the total size of the animals. With rare exceptions like the horse, whose size rose during the process of domestication, most animals were generally smaller than they were in their wild forms. In addition, the bone structure changed, the teeth pattern changed, becoming smaller and more crowded. The hair and wool were refined, with the appearance of long wool being the most significant modification. This change was brought on by an abrupt mutation that postponed the early transformation of the wool fibers. With this, we come to end of today's lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.